Good morning and welcome to the second Sunday of Lent. How's your fast going? For those of you who chose to join me in fasting in some form, how are you doing? Me? Eh, I'm still trying my best. Failing, of course, and trying again. Throughout Lent, we are reading both the Old Testament and New Testament readings, and I'm going to be speaking about both of them separately. The Old Testament, which I will talk about in the teaching moment, follows on a theme of covenant. And in the New Testament, which I will preach on in the sermon, will include one of the most deliciously quotable lines in Scripture, "Get behind me, Satan." Whoever is the readers for this morning, make sure that you really enjoy yourself when you get to that line. We have one more scripture reading, of course, the Psalm. I don't normally talk about the Psalms, but this time I want to set the stage before we get to reading it. It is Psalm 22, which starts with the lines, my God, why have you forsaken me?" If that sounds familiar to you, it's probably because Jesus quotes this line when he dies on the cross. There's other lines in this psalm which are also used in connection with Jesus, like verse 18, "They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." For Christians, Psalm 22 and Jesus' Passion, those stories dovetail together really nicely. That's wonderful, but just keep in mind that this psalm wasn't written as a prophecy about Jesus. The main character in this psalm is someone very different. All the psalms are ascribed to King David, but this one doesn't sound like David at all to me. The writer of this psalm is someone who feels encircled by threats. They are starving. They say, "All my bones are on display." And their body is deeply distressed. "I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth." Dogs and wild animals prowl around them, just waiting for this person to die. They write, "I am a worm and not a man." I read this and hear the voice of someone who is without shelter, without food, without water. And it makes me think of all the other people in our world who are made homeless, who hunger, who are threatened every time they stop to rest, whose bones are sticking through their own clothes, who are walked over as if they're worms and not people. Both in our towns and around the world, there are plenty of people who fit this description. And this is a psalm in their voice. In our Bible study on the theology of pop culture, we are reflecting on who produces culture. When talking about capitalism, we showed how those with money and power create culture. And then last week, when talking about horror films, we saw how consumers, average people, shape culture. Recordings of these classes, by the way, are available if anyone's interested in catching up. But nowhere in society do we see a place where the homeless shape culture. Except here. The Bible gives voice to people who would otherwise be unheard. In the middle of the most influential book in the world is the story of someone who had nothing. And when Jesus dies, the most pivotal event in the world, it is this voice that he quotes. The homeless, the refugee, the most vulnerable and oppressed. When you hear this psalm later in today's service, hear their voice. Hear not just their suffering and pain, but listen closely in the psalm for what gives them joy. In what do they hope? The psalm will end with praise, and if that surprises you, like it often surprises me, take extra time this week to listen for the experience of those on the margin, to voices we don't normally hear. When we listen, we will learn what it really means to trust and praise in God. Let's worship.